What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Burke aka Dansgo8 here, and this video is going to be me breaking down and explaining Final Fantasy X CTB system. The reason I wanted to make this was because I'm someone that spent a lot of time with this game, and I've done high level challenges like no sphere grid, Riku only, no overdrives, and no sphere grid Dark Aeons. Even then, after a good 15-20 years of playing this game, I still don't understand the CTB system to the most minute detail. And so I figured it was time for me to truly sit down and study the CTB system, understand how it works, and share it with you guys. So I hope you've had your morning coffee or you're feeling mentally awake for this one, because if you're expecting to just sort of sit back and chill and just enjoy me kind of talking about something, then maybe you will still enjoy it in that fashion, but this is genuinely more of a technical video in which we're going to be talking about stat mechanics and numbers and those kind of things, and so you're going to have to be kind of switched on and a bit more focused to truly grasp and understand the things I'm talking about in this video. So let's get started. We're going to start with some of the more basic stuff, and as time goes on I'm going to be trying to break down the CTB system. Before I get into it, thank you to the man, the myth, the legend, P. Birdman. I've of course been using him as like a consultant for this video. After I wrote the script, I shared it with him to make sure that I'm not talking shit and not misunderstanding anything in the system. And he's the kind of guy that his knowledge of things like the CTB and all of the systems involved in it and all of the calculations is so far superior to mine that I trust him deeply with this stuff. So hopefully everything that I've said here has been vetted by P. Birdman and therefore should also be correct and consistent with all of the data in the game. I'm going to be diving deep here and really going into a lot of details, so hopefully you guys will enjoy it and learn something new from this video. Before we dive deep into things, I think it's again important to note that the entirety of the knowledge in this video is not necessary for you to be good at the game or to be successful at the game. I personally didn't understand how the most complicated and difficult aspects of the CTB worked, and despite that I've run through the game tens of times. The main reason that it might be interesting to learn about these things is mainly just curiosity. It's of academic interest for most people, and there are some niche scenarios where you're doing particular challenges perhaps, where you want to use some extra tools to kind of figure out how the turns work during the battle and in advance, for example. But by and large, for a huge majority of the people watching this video, you don't really need to understand everything to its most minute detail. But this is the Dansgo8 channel. We don't just say things like that and then just not make content. If there's interesting stuff to learn about the game, I'm always up for learning it, and I'm going to share it with you guys. So hopefully enough of you guys will also be interested that you will learn something new from this video and you'll have a good time. So let's begin. Let's start with the most basic thing. CTB stands for Conditional Turn-Based, and Final Fantasy X is the only entry in the main line of Final Fantasy series that uses a CTB system instead of the more commonly used ATB system, which stands for Active Time Battle System. But of course we are going to be focusing and diving deep into Final Fantasy X. What sets it apart is of course that first letter, conditional. Now this is a reference to the idea that the turn order in battle is going to be influenced by the actions that you take, and players will get to see a visual representation of what this is going to look like before they even make the move. So of course we're all familiar with the CTB on the top right of the screen. That shows you a turn order based on a set of parameters, and you can change that turn order depending on what moves you potentially use during the battle. When a character's turn arrives in battle, time freezes and you're able to choose which action you want to take. You can take as long as you want, and some are going to continue the normal flow of battle and the turn order will remain the same. Other decisions are going to change the timing of the next turn for that particular character, for your fellow party members, or for the enemy that you are facing. So what we're going to be doing is finding out how the game calculates when these turns are going to happen and the different variables that come into play when we're going to be taking an action in battle. There's many ways in which the CTB is influenced, and once you gain a mastery of the ticking heart of this system, you can map out the turns of a battle before they've even happened. Now if you're already familiar with the CTB and some of the more technical aspects, the ticking heart of the system is already a pun, because at the core of the CTB system is a ticking clock. Now the irony here is that even though once you have your own turn you can take as long as you want to make a move, there is still a ticking clock that governs the way the battle is going to play out. So yes, time might freeze when it's your turn, but the way in which the turn order is decided is governed by the amount of ticks that pass between actions in battle. Understanding how these ticks move and what they're influenced by is the key to mastering the CTB at the highest level. That is something that I had personally never mastered myself up until this point, but after some study I think I've got there and I truly understand how everything works, and so that's what we're going to be learning more about as we continue. The first thing we need to be clear about is that even though for any given turn there is no timer, the entire battle plays out on a ticking clock and there is a passage of time. Every entity in the battle has its own timer, which counts down the ticks to when it can take a turn. When that timer hits 0, a turn is going to be taken. Once the turn is taken, there is a time cost of that particular action, so once you make a move, the timer begins again and starts to count down as you wait for the next opportunity to take an action. The game helps you visualize this with the CTB indicator on the top right that we're all very familiar with. Using this, you can see whose turn it currently is and the future order of turns based on the current countdown of ticks. At face value, it's simple enough. If we look at a move now, we can see that it's currently Tidus's turn. After his turn, it's Waka's turn, then the enemy's turn, and then Riku's turn, so on and so forth. But there's already another layer to the CTB that many of us, me included, never really understood too well. I'm referring to the pink and dark pink bars that are also visible in the CTB. You can intuitively know that they're related to the turn order and they're going to shift and change colour when previewing a move sometimes. But just what are these bars and what exactly are they trying to tell you? This is where we need to start talking specifically about ticks, and I'm not talking about you yet. The CTB window shows the next 16 turns that are going to be taken in the battle, assuming that every action taken will not have an effect on the order. An example of something that won't affect the turn order would be simply using the attack command. I'm going to explain this in more detail later, but for now suffice to say that the CTB is going to show you the next 16 turns if every member of the battle simply used attack, including the enemy. The pink bars that you see in the CTB represent the amount of ticks that need to pass for the character to get the turn. When it's your character's turn, for example, there are no pink bars. This implies that there's 0 ticks that need to be taken and the turn is yours for as long as you want it. If you have a full-size pink bar, that's 20 ticks, and for each further colour that is filled, that's another 20 ticks away. So this means that the CTB can show a turn that is a maximum of 60 or more ticks away, and these are represented by a bar of the darkest colour. So if this is the case, then the main question we need to ask and answer is what influences these ticks and how soon does it reach 0? There are of course multiple factors to this, and we're going to start with the first one, which is agility. So the reason I say that you don't need to understand the CTB in great depth is because much of it is intuitive, and the CTB display is generally going to tell you what you need to know already. One aspect of Final Fantasy X that should be intuitive to players is that as your agility goes up, you'll be able to take more turns relative to others. We've all seen that play out during our playthroughs, where the higher your agility gets, the more turns you're going to be able to take compared to enemies that have lower agility. So if you go back to Besaid and fight a dingo after you've made it to the end of the game and your agility stat is much higher, you're going to notice that you can take a lot more turns compared to the dingo than you could before, and that's because your agility stat is much higher. You'll also notice this within your party as well. The party members that have the highest agility are going to be the ones taking the most turns in battle. So based on that, what we know is that agility can range from a character's base stat all the way up to 255, and you might think, well, that's easy enough. You know, if you have 255 agility, you're going to get the most turns. If you have 5 agility, you're going to get the least amount of turns. But unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. So we need to get into this and explain how agility is related to tick speed and how exactly it influences the turn order in battle. Now, if you've watched my 100% walkthrough on the channel, then you'll already know that once a battle is underway and the first turns have been taken, there is objectively no difference between having 170 agility and 255 agility. Now, if you're hearing that for the first time, let me make it clear again. In Final Fantasy X, there is no need to have more than 170 agility, as it's not going to make your turn come any more quickly if you have 255 compared to 170. The only turn that is influenced by having 255 instead of 170 is on the first turn, and nothing more than that. So if that's news to you, then you're in for a treat, because we're going to be looking at how agility affects tick speed in battle. I've mentioned already that every time you take a turn in battle, the game's going to have to calculate the number of ticks required for your next turn to arrive. Now, there's a simple formula that governs this. Thankfully, the maths in this video is going to be basic arithmetic, but there are of course going to be numbers thrown in that's going to make things a bit more complicated if you're not that used to working with numbers. But thankfully, the maths itself is not that difficult. The formula that governs this is going to be tick speed multiplied by rank multiplied by haste status. And of course, we're going to be going into each of these variables throughout the video. For now, we're going to start with tick speed, and that is because that is the only one that's influenced by your agility stat. Your tick speed can take any value from 3 to 28. So you can already get an idea of how much tick speed is going to affect how quickly you get your turns. Imagine plugging 3 into that formula versus plugging 28 into that formula. So you can already see what a big difference all of this is going to make. Now, how do we know what the tick speed values are? Thankfully, in the Ultimania, there's a nice chart that tells you what the tick speed is for a given agility. So I'm going to share that table with you now, and we're going to look through it and hopefully understand why having 170 agility and having 255 agility is not going to make any difference in battle. So here is the table of agility and how it relates to tick speed. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that it's basically in tiers. And that means that any agility stat for a given tier will give you the same tick speed. So if we look through the group here, once you go above 5 agility, which is already your lowest character's base agility, you're going to start to go through tiers. So if you have, let's say, let's pick a number. If you have 35 agility, your tick speed is 7, all the way up until you get to 44 agility. So 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, all of those agility stats all have the same tick speed. So following that logic, if we look up all the way at the top, the fastest tick speed you can get is 3. And the range for that tick speed is 170 all the way to 255. And that, my friends, is why once you hit 170 agility, there is no difference after the first turn in terms of how quickly your next turn comes, because your agility is not going to increase your tick speed any further at that point, and therefore is not going to influence the countdown for your next turn any further than that. So that means if you're looking to be as fast as possible in Final Fantasy X and to make your turns come as quickly as you can, then all you need to do is get to 170 agility. That is the magic number where your tick speed falls to 3 and you get to make your moves as quickly as possible. So of course the next question is going to be, well then what the hell is the point of having 255 agility? You were talking about the first turn and that kind of thing. Why would anyone want to have 255 agility? Is there any reason why it would be beneficial? So now we need to talk about the first turn in the battle and how your agility influences that. So for this part, we're going to talk about something called the initial counter value, shortened as ICV. The ICV is a number that is assigned to each participant of the battle at the start of the encounter. This is used to determine the speed at which the first turn of the battle participant will arrive. Now, as a general rule of thumb, when there's no ambush or preemptive strike, your party member's ICV value is going to be their tick speed multiplied by 3 as a minimum. Again, these are numbers and data that's been obtained from the Ultimania and from the game's data itself. So again, if we look back at the previous table, once you get to 170 agility, you have a tick speed of 3 and it stays 3 no matter how high up you go. But when the game decides what your initial counter value is going to be, it actually breaks things down further. So this time there is going to be a difference between having 170 and 255. So what we need to do here again is to have a look at another table of values to see how this is all going to play out and how your agility is going to relate to your initial counter value. So what we need to do here is have a look through the stats and see what agility value corresponds to what initial counter value. Again, so that I don't have to go through every single number and make this video 6 hours long, we're going to be focusing on the higher tiers here. And you notice that between 170 and 255, there's multiple sub-tiers this time. It's not one by one, so it's not a different ICV for every individual agility stat, but there is a more specific breakdown between the two numbers. So now we see that if you have 170 agility, your initial counter value is either going to be 8 ticks or it's going to be 9 ticks. So as you can see, a character with 170 agility only has a minimum ICV of 8, whereas the character with 250 agility or above has a minimum ICV of 3. So while there's no difference in how soon their next turn arrives after the first one due to having the same tick speed of 3, the character with the higher agility will have a higher probability of acting first. Now you might say, why is it only a higher probability? Surely if it can be an ICV of 3, then the character with 250 is going to go first every single time. Well, unfortunately that's not always the case, because as you can see there is a range of ICV values. Now the way the game decides what this is going to be is using RNG. So again, if we break it down, a character with 170 agility is either going to have an ICV of 8 or an ICV of 9. It's going to have a 50% chance of having either one, and which one it's assigned is an RNG value, so it's not influenced by what your stat is or anything like that, it is randomized. So that means that there's a 50% chance of having an ICV of 8 if you have 170 agility. Now if you have 250 agility or above, your ICV can range all the way from 3 to 9. So in this situation, there's a range of 7 values that your ICV could be, and that means that there's a 1 in 7 chance that you end up with an ICV of 9. This means that if your 250 character ends up with ICV 9, and your 170 agility character ends up with ICV 8, they will get the turn ahead of the one with 255. But again, if you look at the odds of this happening, there's a 1 in 7 chance of it happening for the character with 250 or above, and there's a 50% chance of the 170 agility character getting an 8. So if you put those two things together, there's about a 1 in 14 chance that the character with the 170 agility will get a move ahead of the one with 250. So in most cases, the character with the higher agility, 250 or above, will get the turn first. There's actually an even more interesting kind of example here, and the ICVs and the numbers that the game assigns to them are kind of a bit weird. So if we head back to the ICV chart and we have a look at 86 to 89 agility, they have an ICV of 8 to 15 ticks. So this means that there's a 1 in 8 chance that you end up with an ICV of 8, even though your agility is only 86. This means that if you have two characters, one with 86 and one with 255 agility, 1 in every 64 times the character with 86 agility will actually get moved first, ahead of the character with 255. So that's some pretty strange stat mechanics, but these are the values that have been taken from the game and that are present in the Ultimania guide as well. So really interesting stuff. So I hope that all makes sense. Again, it's something that you can pause the video, or you can download something from one of the links in the description, and you can look through these numbers and really study them yourself. But for our purposes, I'm just giving you some examples and some insight into how this works as we move forward. So I hope that generally makes sense. So if you look at things in a strictly technical and objective sense, the best opportunity to act first in the battle is to reach 250 agility. Again, because of the range values, it doesn't matter if you're at 251 or 255. As long as you're 250 or above, you gain access to that ICV value of 3, which is the quickest option for acting first in the battle. So in that more objective sense, 250 is actually basically max agility for a party member. But as you've seen, it only influences the first turn in the battle, and depending on RNG and luck factors, the character with 170 agility or lower sometimes can actually still get the turn before anyway. So how much value is there in pushing your agility up to 250? I would say there's almost none at all in pretty much every practical scenario. And I've proved it to you using the tick speed, and I've shown you using the ICV values that even though having higher agility can make your first turn come more quickly, in most practical situations and for most battles, it's just really not that important to spend that extra time grinding up to 250 and above. But this is a Dan's Go 8 video, so we're not just going to leave it at that. We're going to go even deeper and mention some more scenarios in which the ICV and the first turns can be affected. The first scenario is, of course, what about preemptive strikes and ambushes? How does the game determine who gets the first turn, or what the turn order is in those situations? So, if you are in a preemptive strike or in an ambush situation, the side which is disadvantaged, so if you're a preemptive strike, it's the monsters that are disadvantaged, if it's an ambush, it's the party members that are disadvantaged. Then they can only have an ICV of their tick speed times 3. So this means that if you have 255 agility, you cannot have an ICV below 9 if you get ambushed. So remember previously from the table, we showed that if you have 250 agility or above, your ICV can range from 3 to 9. Well, if you get ambushed, then it means the lowest possible ICV you can have is 9, not 3. Therefore, a character with 170 agility and 255 agility, when you get ambushed, they're going to have the same ICV. So then you're going to say, but then who's going to be able to act first in this situation if they have the same ICV value? Then, when there's a tie, the game is going to defer to which character has the higher agility stat. So in ambush situations, the party member with the highest agility is always going to act first. So that's a situation which having 250 instead of 170 will actually be more beneficial. But let's take it a step further. What happens if you have the same ICV and the same agility? So now I'm going to mention a very little known mechanic that I've shared in the past that I'm hoping you guys are going to remember. It's actually related to the Auto Phoenix mechanic in the game. You will notice that in certain situations, certain characters have priority over using Auto Phoenix when someone gets KO'd. So for example, if there's Tidus, Waka and Riku in the party and all of them have Auto Phoenix, if Waka gets KO'd, Tidus will always be the one throwing the Phoenix down every single time. If Riku is the one that gets KO'd, it's still going to be Tidus throwing it every single time, and if Tidus gets KO'd, it's going to be Waka throwing it every single time. And that means that there's certain situations in which the game prioritizes different characters and allows them to act before the other ones when there is a tie, such as two characters trying to use Phoenix down at the same time. So how is this linked to the CTB? Well, the ICV and the agility both being equal puts the game in the same situation, because based on the numbers alone, there's no way to decide which character should have that turn. This is where the game steps in and puts into effect like a priority order. In a situation where everything is equal, this is going to be the priority ranking for the game. Tidus is always going to move first and be at the top of the chain, then Yuna, then Auron, then Kimahri, then Waka, then Lulu, and finally Riku. So in a situation where the ICV and the agility is all tied, that is going to be the turn order for those characters, with Tidus always getting priority and being the first to act. If you have first strike, your ICV is automatically set to 0, and so once again we have the same situation, with agility being the first deciding factor, and if that's also equal, then it's going to be the priority order that I mentioned previously. The final thing that influences the ICV is having SOS Haste at the start of a battle, or having Auto Haste. If you have either of those two, it's going to halve the ICV value that you saw from the previous table, and it's going to round down if there's any decimal places. So that means that if you're auto hasted and you have 250 agility, your ICV is going to be 1 to 4. And if you have 170 agility, your ICV is always going to be 4, because the game rounds down. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 9 divided by 2 is 4.5, but it will round down to 4. So in a situation where there's auto haste involved, the character with 250 agility or above is always going to get the first turn over the character with 170. If there's no auto haste, then like I showed previously, there is a small chance the 170 character can act first. With auto haste, that's not the case. The final thing to add to this ICV section is, what about monsters? How does it work for them? Is it based on their agility stat? Do they follow the same table? For them, it's not quite the same. They have their own ICV table, and to be honest, it looks a lot more like the character tick speed table. So based on their agility stat, they have access to a certain ICV range. And if you look at the monster table, for example, from 170 agility all the way up to 255, they have an ICV range of 9 to 10. So to help us understand this even more, let's just use an example of a monster. I'm going to use a skull in the Calmlands. So this is the wolf-like enemy that you have in the Calmlands. That monster has an agility stat of 28. So if we look at the table, this means it's going to have an ICV between 27 and 30. Which one out of that range is going to be dependent on RNG. As you can see, the lowest possible ICV for a monster is 9 if they have agility between 170 and 255. If the monster and the party member has the same ICV, characters will always take priority over the monsters, so we get to move first in that situation. A good way to prove this is that if you have first strike, you will always get the turn first, even if you have an ambush situation. In an ambush situation, the enemy has an ICV of 0, and you also have an ICV of 0 because you have first strike. But despite both of you having the same ICV, the character will take priority, so you will still get your turn first in that situation. So once again, for the first turn, having the highest agility stat possible is objectively the best choice, but it's so niche and so rarely relevant to the outcome of a battle that it's rarely ever considered like a strict recommendation or considered necessary to go beyond 170. The final thing to mention about ICVs is going to be one trick that the monsters have up their sleeve to beat the system. FAQs in the past have called them immediate actions, P-Birdman calls it super first strike, so you take your pick on what you want to call it, but these are actions that a monster takes at the beginning of the battle which ignores all other parameters like first strike or agility or ICV or anything like that. An example of this is when you meet something like a Varuna and they cast Haste at the start of a battle. So now that we've painted a picture of what happens at the start of a turn, let's do an example of this with party members versus a single monster to really solidify our understanding of ICVs and how the beginning of a battle will work. So let's set up some parameters. We've got Tidus, Waka and Riku, and they're facing a skull in the Calmlands. The parameters we have is that it's not an ambush or a preemptive strike, there's no first strike involved, and there's no auto haste or SOS haste or anything like that. So it's a very vanilla, very simple battle. I've given Tidus 23 agility, I've given Waka 18 agility, I've given Riku 35 agility, and the skull has 28 agility as I mentioned previously. So let's see what the initial turn order could look like based on these parameters. So based on the agility values that we have, Tidus's ICV is going to range between 26 and 27, Waka's is going to range between 31 and 33, Riku will be 20 to 21, and the skull will be 27 to 30. So what we can say with absolute certainty in this situation is that Riku will always get the first turn because she only needs 20 ticks or 21 ticks to pass for her to act, and there are no other battle participants that fit within that range. What we can also say with certainty in this situation is that Tidus will always act before the skull does, because even if Tidus is on the lower end of the RNG and his ICV is 27, and the skull performs the best that it can and it has an ICV of 27 as well, we already know that the character will always take priority in this situation. So this means that Tidus will always act second in this scenario, ahead of the skull. And the final thing is that because Waka's ICV range is above 30, which is the skull's upper limit, that means that Waka will always have his first turn last out of these 4 battle participants. So with the parameters I've set up, the turn order will always be Riku, Tidus, Skull, and Waka. And so this is a very small example of how you can map out what a battle will look like without ever actually triggering the battle off. And it should play out exactly as planned every single time if your parameters are correct. So I could show examples of what happens if there's a preemptive strike, what happens if you have auto haste, what happens if you're ambushed, but again it's going to drag on the video to such a long extent that I'd rather move on. But I've already explained how those things influence the situation, and hopefully you should be able to work through an example yourself if that's what you're curious about calculating. So now that we've concluded the explanation of ICVs and what happens for the first turn of the battle, now we can truly get into the actual flow of battle and what's going to happen after those first turns have been taken. Once that first turn has been taken, we have to return to the calculation that governs how many ticks must pass before a character's next turn. If you remember, it was tick speed multiplied by rank multiplied by haste status. So we've already looked at the first variable, agility, and concluded that the higher the agility tier, the lower the tick speed and the less ticks they need to pass for the next turn to arrive. But there's 2 other influences on this calculation. So now it's time to talk about ranks and how they impact the flow of battle. Every action taken in the game by a character or a monster has a rank attached to it. You can think of a rank as like a time cost or a time it takes to recover after using a particular move. The reason this exists, of course, is because you don't want something like switching a weapon in battle and using a move like Ultima taking the same amount of time, because that just wouldn't be fair and it wouldn't make sense. So in Final Fantasy X, you have ranks ranging from 1 to 8 for normal moves that are usable in battle, and all the way up to rank 10 for overdrives. Rank 1 moves are the fastest, and rank 10 are the slowest. An example of a rank 1 move would be changing your weapon, and rank 10 is Lulu using Ultima Fury as her overdrive. So that's the range. The default rank for a move is 3 because the attack command is a rank 3. Now, a fun fact, the slowest move in the entire game is Lulu's Ultima Fury overdrive. It's a whopping rank 10. It has the longest recovery time of any move in the game. Even Anima's Oblivion, which is obviously a monstrous move, has a rank 8. So Lulu's Ultima Fury is truly the slowest move in the whole game. So now if we look back at the actual CTB and the visualization on the top right of the screen, the turn order assumes that you're going to take a rank 3 action when it's your turn. That's why I call it the default rank, because that's what the CTB is showing you as a visual. So for people that maybe don't have as deep an understanding of the game, or you're newer to the game, you would have hopefully noticed that when you change what move you're going to potentially use in the menu, the CTB is going to shift around. So if you just leave it on attack, nothing's going to change. But if you scroll down to item, for example, you're going to see the CTB turns change. If you try to switch a weapon, you're going to see the preview change. And if you try to use a big move like Ultima, again, you're going to see the preview change. This preview is the reason why you never really need to have a deep understanding of the CTB. I think just knowing that the CTB preview exists on the top right and being able to visualize how different moves affect the CTB is going to be enough for almost every situation that you encounter in the game. And that's why knowing about tick speed and all of these more detailed things is not actually that necessary in terms of practically playing the game. You're going to see visually that if you choose Ultima, that's going to have a massive delay because your turn is going to be pushed all the way down. Even if you don't understand the numbers and the tick speeds and all those kind of things, you have a very simple intuitive indicator that shows you that it's a very slow move and it has a long recovery time. So that's the good part, and for the most part I would say that's enough to get by. But one of the ways in which the CTB actually is not able to help you is with the actions the monsters can take in battle. The reason this is a problem is because the preview is going to show you when the monster will get a turn if it uses attack every single turn. So it's going to default to a rank 3 move. But of course we know that a lot of monsters have moves that are not rank 3. They can be slower or they can be faster. So when you're trying to map out your moves, if a monster uses a move that's not a rank 3, the CTB preview is going to be inaccurate and that monster is going to get its turn at a different time to what you thought it did previously. Now, this is something that used to trip me up a lot when I was playing Final Fantasy X. I used to sort of think that certain things were going to happen in a particular way because I didn't know what the rank of a certain move was, and then I'd be confused where I was like, wait, why did the monster get its turn sooner than it should have? I should have had 3 turns, why did I only have 2 instead, for example? And the reason for that is because the CTB preview is not taking into account the fact that the monster could potentially use a faster or a slower move than a rank 3. One of my favourite examples of this is when you fight Dark Shiva. Dark Shiva has extremely quick attacks, so much so that her regular attack is a rank 1 and not a rank 3. So this makes it much faster than the same command for your own characters, and that means that what's shown on the CTB is not going to be accurate for when she uses the attack. So for example, it might show you on the CTB that Shiva's going to get a move, Tidus, Waka and Riku are going to get a turn after Shiva does, and then Shiva will get her second turn. But when the move actually happens, she might get 2 moves in a row, or she might split the next 3 turns because she's used a move that's rank 1 and much faster than what the CTB shows in the preview. So that's why the preview is not entirely accurate. A lot of people probably didn't even notice that when they were playing for the first time, or if they're just playing casually. But when you're trying to do more difficult battles or you're trying to do challenges, the CTB not behaving as predicted can sometimes be the difference between life or death. So that's why it's definitely tough to sort of predict and understand how the CTB is going to move if you don't know what the rank of the move is and which one they could potentially use. So I think this is a good time to mention something that was nerfed between the different versions of Final Fantasy X. Some of you guys already know about this, but I'm sure it's going to be interesting trivia about the game for other people. We've talked about attack ranks and how they influence the game, and how having something that is a very low rank is going to make you so much faster compared to other moves. So one move that we know for sure makes you quicker is of course Quick Hit. There's a reason it's called Quick Hit. It's because it has a lower attack rank than just using the normal attack command, so it makes your next turn come even more quickly. Now in the HD remaster and in the PAL PS2 version of Final Fantasy X, Quick Hit has a rank of 2, which is quicker than the normal hit, but in the earlier versions of the game, in the US version for example, Quick Hit was actually rank 1 back in the day. Now you can imagine how obscenely quick and broken Quick Hit was in the US version of the game. Now that we have a better understanding of ticks and how everything works, think of this particular situation. Imagine you have a character that has 170 agility or above. This means that they have a tick speed of 3. Now imagine they use Quick Hit, which is rank 1, so you have 3, their tick speed times by 1, and then you multiply that by 0.5 because they're in haste status. That gives you a 1.5. Now we also know that the game rounds down when there's a decimal. That means that when you use Quick Hit in the US version of the game with 170 agility and auto haste, you only need 1 tick to recover and to take your next turn. So you can see how obscenely quick Quick Hit was and how you could completely break the game by spamming it over and over and over again. If we compare that to how it ended up in the European and the HD remaster of the game, then we can see that it's now a rank 2. So what this means is that if you're 170 agility, you have a tick speed of 3, you multiply that by 2 for the rank, which gives you a 6, and then in auto haste you do 6 divided by 2, or 6 times 0.5, and you end up with 3. So that means on a raw tick speed front, just because it's a rank 2 instead of a rank 1, it's actually 3 times slower than it was in the US version of the game. So that's an important piece of trivia, and so now this is something that's fairly well known in the community, but I think a lot of people just know it as Quick Hit used to be broken, it was faster, or maybe you knew the fact that it was rank 1, but seeing it in terms of tick speed and being able to objectively compare it with what it used to be to what it is now, I think makes it even more interesting. So I think that's one of the cool things about being able to make this video. I can explain to you guys why Quick Hit was so insanely broken in the US version of the game. So now if we bring it back to that original formula, we have tick speed, we have rank, and we have haste status. So for rank, in that multiplication, you literally input the rank of the move as a number. So this is how you can see intuitively that if you put in a rank 1 move, you're only going to be multiplying by 1, so the ticks needed for the next turn is going to remain very low. If you input like a rank 6 move, or a rank 8 move, or a rank 10 move, the amount of ticks needed before your next turn is going to go up by obviously a multiple. So that means it's going to take much longer and your turn is going to be much slower. So that is the second major component of how the game calculates when you are going to get your turn. Thankfully for us, the third variable, the haste status one, is actually one of the easiest ones to apply. With this, if your character is in haste status, you multiply by 0.5. If your character is in slow status, you multiply by 2. So again, looking at the formula and plugging in that number, you can see how it's going to affect the countdown of ticks before your next turn, and why haste status is so valuable, because it instantly halves the amount of ticks needed to receive your next turn. So we now have the 3 components that we need to figure this all out. So to recap, we have the agility stat, which is directly related to the tick speed, we have the move rank, and we have haste status. When you put this all together, you have one calculation that tells you how many ticks need to pass for a character's next turn. The counter equals tick speed times move rank times haste status. So let's start to look at some examples and some numbers to really bring this all together and solidify our understanding of the CTB. Once again, we need to set some parameters and just use some values to help us calculate things. And so I'm going to be setting up some parameters and we're going to be working through some examples to hopefully hammer this home. Let's assume we're going to be using Auron and his agility is 100. He gets a turn and he uses the attack command. He doesn't have haste or slow status. When will he get his next turn? Now, with what we've learned so far, this is something that we're able to calculate. His tick speed, according to the table that I shared earlier, at 100 agility is going to be 4. The command attack is a rank 3, and he doesn't have haste or slow, so we can ignore that final variable. So that means that in this example, Oren is going to get his next turn after 12 ticks. On the CTB window, this means that after his current turn, his next one will not even have a single full pink bar, because each pink bar is 20 ticks passing. So let's play around with some variables to see how that's going to affect things. If we change his agility to, let's say, a number like 198, his tick speed is going to go up to 3. So if we keep all of the other parameters constant, going up to 198 agility will make his next move happen in 9 ticks instead of 12. If we change the agility down all the way to 21, the corresponding tick speed for 21 agility is 10. So that means that the next turn is going to come in 10 times 3 ticks. So that's 30 ticks away. So you can see, massive difference. It's 9 ticks at 198 agility. It's 30 ticks at 21 agility. This time we're going to mess around with the attack rank parameter. For example, if you scroll down to the item menu and you use an item, that's a rank 2 move. So this time it means that with 100 agility and a tick speed of 4, 4 times 2 is going to give him 8 ticks. So his turn is going to come more quickly than if he just attacked. For this example, let's use Tidus and assume that Tidus has 100 agility and decides to use Blitz Ace. Now that move has a rank of 7. Tick speed 4 multiplied by rank 7. 4 times 7. That means the next move is going to come in 28 ticks. So he's going to have one full pink bar and a piece of a second darker bar for the next move. This time I'm going to throw some haste into the mix. So let's say Oren has 100 agility and uses a normal attack. Previously we knew that this was tick speed 4 multiplied by rank 3, which gave us 12 ticks. Now though, we're going to apply haste. So that means you're going to multiply 12 by 0.5. That's going to give us only 6 ticks. So you can see how quick we're getting now as a result. Now let's see how devastating using a high rank plus being under slow status can be. Now let's assume that Tidus has 100 agility, uses Blitz Ace, but he's under slow status this time. So with 100 agility we have tick speed 4, multiplied by rank 7, which gives us 28 ticks, but now we multiply that by 2 because of the slow status. So that means that the move takes a massive 56 ticks to recover from that point onwards. So even though he has the same agility stat, based on the different parameters like what move he uses and being under slow status, he basically can take 10 times as long to recover after a move. So that's pretty crazy, and that's why you can see such wild swings in the CTB based on different parameters, even though you have the same agility stat. So now that we have some examples of how the game calculates the ticks, we can put all of this together and work through an actual battle situation to see how it all works. So once again, we need to set up some parameters so that we can use them for our calculations. It's going to be Tidus, Waka and Riku versus the Vidatu in the monster arena. Tidus has an agility of 27, which gives him a tick speed of 9 based on the table. Waka has an agility of 22, giving him a tick speed of 10. Riku has agility 37, giving her a tick speed of 7. And Vidatu's agility is 33, which gives it a tick speed of 8. No one has a first strike weapon, there is no preemptive, there is no ambush, and there is no auto haste. So these are the parameters. The first thing we've got to look at is the ICV values that we mentioned previously to see who is going to get the first turn. Tidus's ICV is going to be between 22 and 27, Waka's between 26 and 30, Riku's between 18 and 21, and Vidatu's between 24 and 26. So you can see there's a little bit of overlap in the ICVs, but I'm not going to go into every single calculation, but you can see intuitively that the odds of Tidus's ICV being lower than Waka's is going to be higher. So Tidus is more likely to get a move before Waka. So in this situation, we know that it's going to be Riku getting the first turn, that's for sure. Other than Riku, it's going to be pretty difficult to calculate in advance who's going to get the first turn, because there is going to be RNG involved. There's a lot of overlap between the ICVs, and this is going to be pretty common when you're playing the game. So one of the hardest things to map out in advance is going to be who gets the first turn, because more often than not, there's going to be overlapping, and when there's overlapping, it will come down to RNG. So to make things easier, I've done the RNG work for you, and I've basically assigned an ICV value based on the ranges to the characters, so we have some values to work with to start the battle. So I gave Riku a 20 ICV, Tidus 24, Vidatu 25, and Waka 29. So now we can officially begin the battle and see how things are going to play out. So once the battle begins, Riku is going to be the character who gets the first turn. The battle has begun and the clock has started ticking. After 20 ticks in the battle, we have our first turn, and that is going to be Riku's turn. So we're going to really start to put together everything that we've learned so far. What we know is that Riku's tick speed is 7, and I'm going to get Riku to use just a straight up attack move, and that's it. This means that her next turn is going to be in 21 ticks, because her tick speed is 7. We multiply that by attack, which is rank 3, so 7 times 3 is going to be 21. Riku's next turn is going to be on 20 plus 21 ticks, so on the 41st tick, Riku will get her second turn. 4 ticks after Riku has had her turn, we're on tick number 24, Tidus will get his first turn. I'm going to make Tidus also use the attack command the same way that Riku did, but his numbers are going to be slightly different. Because his agility is lower, he has a higher tick speed of 9, and remember, in this context, higher tick speed is worse because that means it's going to take longer for your turn to arrive. With a tick speed of 9, if he uses an attack rank 3 move, that means that his next turn is going to be 27 ticks away. So 24 plus 27, that means that on the 51st tick of the battle, Tidus will get his second turn. Then we move ahead one more tick, and this time it's Vidatu's turn. Now Vidatu has 2 moves. Vidatu can use either Ultima or Osmos. I'm going to say in this battle Vidatu uses Ultima. Now normally if your characters use Ultima, it has a much bigger delay, but Vidatu's one is actually quicker. Now the way I know what attack rank Vidatu's Ultima is by consulting P. Birdman's amazing Ultimate Companion Guide that has all of this information that's been taken from the Ultimanias and taken from the game's actual data. So what we know from that is that Vidatu's Ultima is also a rank 3. This means that with a tick speed of 8, when Vidatu uses Ultima, its next turn is going to come in 24 ticks time. Tick speed 8 times rank 3, 8 times 3, 24. This means that with 25 ticks in, plus the 24 ticks needed for the next turn, Vidatu will get his second turn on tick number 49 ahead of Tidus, and this is where having more agility or being in a higher agility tier is going to make a difference. Tidus got the first turn, but Vidatu is going to get the second turn more quickly. Then to round off the first turns in the battle, 4 ticks after Vidatu on tick number 29, Waka is going to get his first turn. He is also just going to use the standard attack. His tick speed is 10, 10 times 3, he's going to get his next move in 30 ticks time on tick number 59. So that concludes the first round of moves in the battle. Now we can look ahead to what's going to happen on the next set of turns. So after Waka, there needs to be another 12 ticks passing until there's another action in the battle. The next action after Waka's first turn is going to be Riku's second turn on tick number 41 as we calculated previously. So 41 ticks in is Riku move 2. This time we're going to spice things up, so hopefully you can keep up. I'm not just going to do attack, attack, attack every time, otherwise it's going to be a bit too boring and a bit too linear. What if Riku actually uses the move Use and uses a Chocobo Feather on Waka? So there's multiple impacts here, and we're going to go through each one and see how they affect the ticks and what's going to happen in the battle. Let's start with Riku here. If she uses Use, that has a rank of 2 instead of 3. It's a quicker move. You guys would have all seen it when you scroll to Use. You can see the CTB shift in Riku's favor. So that's exactly what's going to happen here. Because it's a rank 2 move and her tick speed is 7, that means that her next turn after using Use is going to come in 14 ticks instead of the usual 21. So that means that 41 plus 14, Riku's third turn will come on tick 55. That much is pretty straightforward. Now we need to have a look at what's going to happen to Waka now that he's being hasted on this particular action. So what we knew at this point was that Waka was going to get his next turn on tick number 59, but we've only made it to tick 41 so far. That means that there's still 18 ticks left until Waka gets his next turn. When you apply haste status, this means that Waka's been sped up and his next turn is only going to be 9 ticks away instead of 18 ticks away. So if we look at the numbers, previously his next turn would be on tick number 59, now he's going to get his turn on tick number 50. So now that Waka's been hasted in the battle, there's something that I want to mention which I hadn't previously mentioned up until this point, because I didn't want to sort of jump the gun too much and talk about something this deep without the prior understanding first. Now that we've been talking about the battle flow and we've been talking about ticks and how everything affects everything else, it's a good time to mention that what you think you know about haste, or what I thought I knew about haste especially, is not quite true when it comes to how it operates before the first turn that a character is hasted. Let me explain this. When I first made this video, the way I recorded it was to say that Riku uses a chocobo feather on Waka. As a result, the amount of ticks needed for Waka to take his next turn will go down by half because he's been hasted. Now, I sent these notes to P. Birdman and he was having a look at it, and he came back to me with a slight revision. He's like, well, yes, you're correct in that the amount of ticks left until he takes his turn will halve, but it's not actually because he's in haste status. Haste status itself only takes effect after you actually get the turn. So during that gap between when Riku tosses the chocobo feather and when Waka acts, he's not actually in haste status at that moment. It actually kicks in on the tick where his turn actually arrives. So what's happening here, and why is he getting his turn sooner then if he's not in haste status? And this is the part that's super fascinating. And again, this is like S tier stat mechanics, sort of very, very nitty gritty nuts and bolts stuff. And this is the kind of stuff that there's only a handful of people in the world, in my opinion, other than the game developers themselves, that would actually know about this stuff and be able to sort of refer to it and explain it to others. And hopefully you guys are going to join a very select group once you listen to this explanation and hopefully understand it. So haste is a very interesting status because it works in two different ways. The first way in which it works is the one that we expect and the one that I've already mentioned, where when you look at the calculation for the countdown, being in haste status means that you can multiply by 0.5, and so when you take an action under haste status, the amount of ticks needed for your next turn goes down by a half. So that much of it is very clear. But what happens in that gap between when you're hasted and when you get the turn? Now let's have a look at this Riku to Waka example to illustrate what actually does happen, and hopefully it should make sense. So before Riku tossed the chocobo feather, Waka needed 18 ticks before he could get his next turn. Riku tosses the chocobo feather, he now needs 9. Even though the manifestation is exactly the same, the reason why it goes down by a factor of a half is not actually the same as being in haste status. What really happens here is that technically, tossing the chocobo feather onto Waka deals a CTB healing effect on his countdown. So casting haste on someone, or using a chocobo feather on someone, or using a mix which has haste in it, has a CTB healing effect of 50%. What this translates to is the amount of ticks remaining before your next turn, it will go down by half, as if you already had haste status. But in a technical sense, because it's CTB healing, that is the reason why it's actually happened, not because the haste status has actually started kicking in and is working already. Now you might think this is such a kind of pointless detail because it works out exactly the same in battle. Well, there is one scenario in which you can kind of see the difference a little bit, and this one's actually pretty fascinating. So let's say, for example, you have a character that's in zombie status and you want to haste them. So let's have exactly the same scenario here. Riku takes the turn, Waka had 18 ticks left until he got his turn, but he's in zombie status. How do things change now? What we know about zombies in Final Fantasy X and in most Final Fantasy games, of course, is that healing effects on them will be reversed. Now, healing is one thing and buffs are another thing. So if you cast haste on a zombie, they will still keep that haste status. It won't reverse it to become slow. They're still going to have haste when you use a chocobo feather on them. But what happens to that countdown when you use haste on them? Now normally, if it's the case that it's just the haste mechanic that works anyway, there's no CTB healing, what's the difference? It's the same thing. What it would mean is that even if Waka was under zombie status, if you toss a chocobo feather on him, his next turn will be in 9 ticks time because of what we've said already. But because casting haste or using a chocobo feather is technically a healing move, it's a CTB healing move instead of healing HP for example, the zombies actually reverse that. So what that means is that instead of 18 ticks, he's going to take a 50% CTB damage, which is going to mean that he will need 27 ticks until his next turn. So when you cast Haste on a zombie, they take an initial CTB damage effect, which is like a mini delay basically, and then when it is their turn, the Haste will kick in and function as we've shown already in the video. So that is one very niche way of objectively showing that being under Haste and having a CTB healing effect is not actually the same thing. So like I said, this is really S tier, breaking it down to the atomic level stuff, but it was a really interesting detail, and of course it's not something that I knew about either, but when P Birdman explained it, it made sense to me and I was like, that's just super dope. And especially with the zombified character example, it really started to make sense. So that is the deal with Haste and how it actually works in the game, and the 50% CTB healing effect it has on the countdown of the character that it's used on. It's really, really fascinating stuff. So for our intents and purposes, the calculation stays the same. Riku tosses a chocobo feather onto Waka. He previously had 18 ticks left to go, now he's going to have 9 ticks left. Because he's had the chocobo feather used on him, he's had a CTB healing effect of 50%, it's gone down from 18 to 9. So it's not quite semantics, but for almost all scenarios you can just interchangeably say, because he's been hasted, his countdown has gone down by a half, even if it's not technically true at the most accurate level of analysis for the stat mechanics. Previously his next turn would be on tick number 59, now he's going to get his turn on tick number 50. So not only does it speed up the next turn after the haste is cast, it's obviously going to have a continued effect as long as he has the status applied on him. So hopefully that's all made sense so far. 41 ticks in, this is the story. 8 ticks later, on tick number 49, it's time for Vidatu to use another move. Vidatu this time is going to use Osmose, and Osmose is a rank 2 move, so it's a little bit quicker than the ultimate that it has. Since it's a rank 2 and Vidatu's tick speed is 8, that means the next move is going to be in 16 ticks, so tick number 65. And now we can continue on to the next action. Just 1 tick after Vidatu acts, we have a Waka now again because he has been hasted and he's saved 9 ticks from his previous turn. Now that he gets a turn, he's just going to use his standard attack move, and this time the calculation will be slightly different because he's in haste status. So his tick speed is 10, attack is rank 3, so 10 times 3 is 30, but because he's in haste status we multiply it by 0.5, so that means he only has 15 ticks to wait for the next turn. So his turn will also be on the 65th tick, the same as Vidatu, and we'll get to that in a little bit. 1 tick after Waka, it's now Tidus' second turn, and Tidus is going to use something with a massive delay to show you how much effect it's going to have on the battle. Tidus will now use Blitz Ace, which is a rank 7 move. This means that since his tick speed is 9, and the move is a rank 7, 9 times 7, that means his next move is going to be in 63 ticks time. So now that we're on tick 51, plus 63 is going to be 114 ticks before Tidus gets his third turn in the battle. From this point on, I'm not going to drag this out for too long, hopefully you guys are getting the point anyway. What we're going to do is assume that everybody uses a rank 3 move from this point on. I want to show you guys how long it's going to take for Tidus to get his turn because of the massive delay that he's incurred up until this point. So from tick 51 onwards, let's have a look at what's going to happen based on the amount of ticks that have gone by in battle. So on tick 55, Riku's going to get a turn. On tick 65, Waka's going to get a turn because he has priority over Vidatu. If a party member and a monster have the same countdown and they reach their turn on the same tick, the characters will always have priority over the enemy. So Waka moves first, but even though it's the turn after Waka's, it's still on the same tick on the clock. So tick 65 is going to have Waka's turn, and then it's going to go to Vidatu's turn while we're still on tick 65. Then on tick 76, Riku gets another turn. Tick 80, Waka gets another turn. Tick 89, Vidatu gets another turn. 95, Waka. 97, Riku. 110, Waka. 113, Vidatu. 114, Tidus. So because Tidus used a Blitz Ace, that meant that there were 10 actions from other battle participants before he got another turn. So that's why it's absolutely huge. Now imagine he was in haste status. Instead of being in 63 ticks, his next move would have been in 31 ticks, because if you halve 63, that leaves you with 31.5, game rounds down to 31. So then his next turn would have come on tick 82, and he would have got his next turn much quicker in the battle. But because he didn't have haste, and he ended up using a move with massive delay, you can see just how much of a huge effect it had on the battle. So there we go guys, that's an example of being able to basically map out what the battle is going to look like tick by tick, because you understand the formulas, you've looked up tables, you've looked up P. Birdman's Ultimate Companion Guide, and you know the different ranks for the moves that you're going to be facing. When you put all of these things together, you can literally, other than the initial counter value, you can actually start to map out what the entire battle will look like based on the different actions you take. And so that's just really awesome. If you can get to a stage where you can map out a battle before it even happens, then you've basically attained mastery of the CTB system. And to be able to kind of pre-map everything in advance and then to potentially see what you've already mapped out manifesting in an actual battle is kind of insane. Again, is it ever necessary? It's almost never ever necessary unless you're doing some high level challenge and you want to figure out if a battle is even possible according to like the agility stat. So can I get my turn in on time, or will I always be too slow to, let's say, I don't know, summon before a particular turn happens, or to toss a light curtain before a move, whatever it might be. If it's that sort of life or death and you have to know how many turns you can get in before a certain thing, then yes, knowledge of the CTB and tick speeds and all of those things, you'll be able to know if something is theoretically possible in a battle. So hopefully that example battle was cool and it helped you really put everything together and understand how the CTB system works in that particular situation. Now, of course, that situation I think is going to apply to most of what you encounter in the game, but there is one thing that I think is going to happen frequently enough that is going to be worth covering and showing you guys how it actually works, because I've been curious about this one for a long time as well, so I was finally able to take a look at this and see how it works as well. Now, as you probably guessed from who's on screen right now, I'm going to be talking about summoning for this particular section. What happens to the CTB when you summon an Aeon and when you dismiss them and you return to the party? So let's use this battle as an example to demonstrate what happens. Now, the first thing you need to know is what happens when you actually summon. So if you look at the CTB as it is right now, there is Yuna's turn on this current tick, there's going to be Auron's turn in maybe 7 or 8 ticks, something like that. And then you have the Mandragora coming in maybe like 3, 4, 5 ticks after Auron does. So that's the current battle situation. Then you have Riku coming in maybe another 6 ticks, 7 ticks after Mandragora. So whatever you see on the CTB on the top right at the moment, that is going to freeze for the party members upon summoning. Now the reason I say it's going to freeze for the party members will make sense a little bit later on. But for now, what you need to know is that once you summon the CTB that you see on the right, all of the countdown ticks remaining for the next turn, so for Auron's turn, for Riku's turn, and for Yuna's turn after that, that is going to remain the same once you come back to the battle, be that as a result of the summon dying or as a result of dismissing. So that's the first important thing to note, and hopefully with the visuals as well, this should make more sense. So I'm going to make the summon and then we're going to talk about what happens next. So of course your summon has its own set of stats, and you can view that from the menu anyway, and your summon's agility stat means that it's going to function exactly the same as your characters do mechanically. Of course you can teach your summons haste, and when you use haste on a summon, everything's going to behave the same way as it does for characters, so there's no issues with that particular stuff. So once the summon is out there, it takes the same tick that Yuna did previously, so there's no kind of time delay in summoning in a CTB sense. If you look at the Mandragora's turn is the same number of ticks away as it was before Yuna made the summon. So that's what I mean. In that aspect, you summon, the summon is instantaneous, and your summon just takes over the same tick that Yuna had, and the battle resumes as normal. The important part that's worth discussing is what happens when you dismiss your Aeon or when your Aeon gets killed. This is the part that is the most interesting in terms of the CTB. In the background footage, you're going to see Shiva get poisoned by Mandragora, which would not happen But this is the P Birdman mod. That's the one I have installed right now on my emulation, and I kind of forgot at that point when I was recording. But yeah, in a normal playthrough, Shiva should not get poisoned, but this is the P Birdman mod. If you've never heard of the P Birdman mod before, I'm going to put a link in the description so you can check that out, but I'm not going to kind of spend any time talking about that. What I'm going to talk about is when you dismiss an Aeon, basically, even though the CTB throws for your party members and they will have the same countdown when the battle resumes, the enemy's countdown is going to be whatever you see on the CTB before the Aeon is dismissed or killed. So for this first example, you can see that Shiva's going to get 2 turns, and then Mandragora's going to have a turn. We have the pink bar, we have the lightest pink bar, and then we have the mid-tone pink bar. That's not completely full, so it's looking like it's about maybe 32 ticks or something away at the moment. So what this is going to mean is that you're going to dismiss Shiva. Mandragora will need 32 ticks until it gets its next turn. Now, if before you summoned Shiva, your 2 other party members or even Yuna herself had less than 32 ticks left before the turn, then those guys are still going to get their turn first. So at this stage, you need to kind of have a look at how many ticks your characters had left before the summoning to know if they're going to get a turn after the summoning. So in this particular scenario that you're seeing here, after you dismiss Shiva, your character should have enough time to get a turn, and that's hopefully what you're going to be seeing playing out on screen. So the party members come back in, and you can see everyone's got their turns, and because there was a few ticks left before Auron's turn, for the Mandragora they had 32 ticks left previously, but once Auron's turn actually arrived, there was another maybe 6 ticks or something that went by, so it's gone down to about 24, 26 ticks remaining until the next turn. So that's generally how it's going to go. The CTB was frozen for the party members, but for the enemy that you're facing, whatever CTB countdown they had before the dismissal or before the Aeon was KO'd, that's what's going to apply later on. So this is something that's important to note, because if you leave yourself in a scenario where your Aeon dies or you dismiss it and the enemy had less ticks remaining than they did before the summon, then the enemy is going to gain an advantage when you return to the battle. So for this example, we have Yuna ready to summon. Again, these numbers might not be exact, but just for the sake of understanding, they should be close enough to what's accurate to make the point. We're going to say that Auron is 5 ticks away, we're going to say that Riku is 12 ticks away, and we're going to say that Mandragora is 15 ticks away before the summon actually happens. This time what I'm going to do is I'm going to summon an Aeon, but I'm going to dismiss them at a point where Mandragora would normally have, let's say, 1 or 2 ticks left before they were to get a turn against a summon. So previously, if the CTB was frozen for all battle participants, that wouldn't be important. Once Valifor is dismissed, Auron and Riku would still get their turns ahead of Mandragora. But because the timer continues to roll and the countdown that's happening for the Mandragora against the summon will continue to apply, once the Aeon gets dismissed, the Mandragora is going to actually leapfrog Auron and Riku and get its turns before those guys do. And that's what I'm going to be showing you guys right now in the background footage, so hopefully it's going to also make sense. So hopefully now that you've seen that, this will be an easier way for you to understand, because that's one of the things where for years when I was playing the game, I could never know if after I dismissed the Aeon, whose turn would come at what time. I didn't know what that link was between that whole situation. But now that I know that link, and for you guys it's going to be helpful too, let's say you're in a very difficult battle and you want to know if once your Aeon gets dismissed, or if you know your Aeon's going to be KO'd in the next move, what's going to happen afterwards. Knowing that can really save your life sometimes, so it's definitely an important piece of CTB mechanics to understand, and the best way to do it is before your summon's going to be killed, or before they're going to be dismissed, make sure you check the countdown of what the enemy has to go after that move, and compare that to what your fellow party members had left before you did the summon. Now normally that's not how you play the game. You're not going to be making a note of, okay, Auron has 6 ticks left before you make a summon. But now that you're equipped with this information, if you're doing some kind of challenge or you find yourself in a difficult situation, I think having a handle on what the CTB situation was before the summon happened can make a legitimate difference to whether or not you succeed in a difficult battle where you need summons to help you. So that is a demonstration of how the CTB works with regards to summons, and hopefully that's going to be helpful for your playthrough as well. So one of the oldest and most important resources for understanding the stat mechanics of Final Fantasy X is literally called the Stat Mechanics FAQ, and it's been around for almost 20 years or something like that at this point. And it was always a point of reference for me when I was trying to study and learn the mechanics of Final Fantasy X. But one thing that I've never seen any text about, it's not in the Stat Mechanics FAQ, and I don't think I've seen it on the Final Fantasy Wiki or anything like that either, is the question, well, the important question of what happens when you're KO'd and revived. How does that manifest in the CTB? How much delay is there, and what happens with that situation? So that's something that I've had to add back in at this point, because I went through the first recording and the first edit, and because my general guideline was the Stat Mechanics FAQ, I completely forgot about the question of what happens when you get KO'd and revived. So for this one I had to do a little more digging and find out what actually happens, and thankfully, based on the foundation that we have at this point, it should be relatively simple to explain what happens with being KO'd and being revived in terms of the CTB. So of course, when you get KO'd, you're basically going to be removed from the CTB. You're KO'd, you can't make any moves, you can't do anything. But what happens when someone revives you? The calculation is pretty simple, thankfully. It's literally just going to be the revived character's tick speed multiplied by 3. That's when they're going to get their next turn. So that's when the countdown begins. So let's put this into an example. Let's say you have a character that has 170 agility. This gives them a tick speed of 3. This character's been KO'd. Let's just say for this particular example you didn't have Auto Phoenix, so they're kind of KO'd, they're waiting to be revived. The same tick where someone revives them, then the countdown will begin. So someone tosses the Phoenix down, and because their tick speed is going to be 3 at 170 agility, 3 times 3, 9 ticks later, the character with 170 agility is going to get their next turn after being revived. And that's generally how it works. Same deal as previously, if 9 ticks later it's also the monster's turn, the character is going to get priority, and also if there's another character that's going to get a turn 9 ticks later, it's going to go first by agility stat, and if agility stats are equal, it's going to follow the priority order that I've previously mentioned. That's the general gist of how it works. If you have Auto Phoenix, because it basically happens instantaneously, your character gets KO'd, the Auto Phoenix is tossed and they're revived. This all basically means that tick speed multiplied by 3 ticks later, after the Auto Phoenix kicks in, that's when your character gets to continue their next turn. So that's how revival works, and I think it's a useful one to know, and it should allow you to basically calculate and see in advance when your character is going to come back into the battle after they get KO'd. So that's an important thing to note. But we're not quite done yet. This is already going to be a very long, very technical, very verbose video, so we might as well just go all the way to the extreme and talk about even more eventualities that are worth considering with regards to the CTB. Hopefully at this point there's at least some people that are wondering, but what about delay attacks? What do they actually do to the CTB? You haven't talked about those at all. So, as you might have guessed at this point, delay attacks are basically dealing CTB damage and adding a certain number of ticks to a character before they can act again. Now there's a few different flavors of delay attacks in the game, but to keep it simple we're going to focus on 2, the weak delay and the strong delay, and these 2 options are already going to cover the vast majority of delay attacks that you can get hit by in the game. So to understand what happens when you get hit by a delay attack, we of course need to look at our friend the tick speed once again. And hopefully, since we've laid down a lot of groundwork at this point, I think the best way to illustrate this is going to be to use an example. Let's say we have a character who has an agility stat of 12. We know from the tables that their tick speed is 13, and that means that after they use a move which is a rank 3, their next turn is going to be in 39 ticks. Again, assuming there's no haste in effect. So let's say there's 20 ticks left until they can act again in battle. What happens if they get hit by a delay attack? There's 2 very simple formulas that determine what's going to happen. Example 1 is going to be a weak delay attack. In that situation, you take the tick speed of your character, you multiply it by 3, and then divide that number by 2 to work out the amount of extra ticks they now have to wait. So let's apply this to our situation. We have a tick speed of 13 because the character has agility 12. Multiplying that 13 by 3 gives us 39. We then divide that number by 2 and we get 19.5. As we at this stage know, the game will always round down in that situation, so we end up with a delay of 19 ticks. So previously they had to wait 20 ticks until their next turn, now they have to wait a total of 39 ticks. And as you've seen from some of the examples given previously, even 19 ticks as a delay, especially at higher levels, can have quite a bad influence. But what if you're hit with a strong delay attack? Of course, then it's even worse. The formula for that is a bit simpler, is basically your tick speed times 3. That's the amount that gets added on. So let's work through the example again. If you have a tick speed of 13 and multiply it by 3, you're going to have a delay of 39 ticks. So previously you had to wait 20 ticks, now you have to wait for a whopping 59 ticks before your next turn. Something worth noting here is that even if you're in haste status, you're still going to receive the CTB/tick damage in this scenario. But let's say you're at very high agility levels and your tick speed is very low, the delay is going to be relatively weak because your tick speed is, let's say, 3, that's going to be multiplied by 3 again to be 9, then you're going to take half of that damage if it's a weak delay. It's going to be 4.5, round down to 4, you're going to take 4 ticks of damage on a weak delay, and you're going to be taking 9 ticks extra damage on a strong delay. So the higher your agility stat and the faster you are, depending on which tier you're in and what tick speed you have, the delay is going to hurt you less and less depending on how quick you are. Some attacks have a slow base delay, and that means that the delay only takes effect if it can afflict slow at the same time. Now if you are in SOS haste, for example, or you're in auto haste, that means you're not going to take any delay at all because they can't afflict slow on you in the first place, and the delay only works if slow affliction is successful. But if it's not auto haste or SOS in critical HP, then if you get hit with a slow based delay, then the haste is going to be cancelled out by the slow, and that means you're going to take the full CTB damage if you have haste only used manually by an item or a spell. So that's how delay works with regards to the CTB. It's a very nasty status, but becomes less and less relevant the higher your agility stat is. In terms of stat mechanics, I think delay is super fascinating because there's so many different layers to it, and the way that it's caused and the manifestations it has on the CTB, to me at least, has been really fascinating to learn about. So I want to mention like a final really cool aspect of delay. So as mentioned previously, the act of casting haste, or actually casting slow, has CTB healing effects or it has CTB damaging effects. So this means that if you cast slow onto a character, they take CTB damage, and that means that their turn will come in twice the amount of ticks. So if there's 20 ticks left until a monster's turn, you cast slow on it, it takes CTB damage from the slow, and that means that its next turn is going to be 40 ticks away now instead of 20. The final thing to note about this whole thing is that basically when you use slow, it's CTB damage, and therefore the amount of ticks before the next turn is going to double. But if you actually use slow touch or slow strike, because it's from a weapon, it doesn't have the same formula, and therefore if you use slow strike, it's not going to have the same CTB damaging effect that slow does. So again, in a very technical sense, casting slow on an enemy is a better choice compared to using slow strike on them, because in both cases the slow will actually take effect when the character has its turn, but if you use slow strike, you don't get the additional CTB damage benefit before they get the turn. And so that's another really cool little unique CTB thing that's worth mentioning, especially when we're talking about delays. We're almost there, my friends, but I have some bonus content to finish the video with. Tick speed does not affect only turn order in battle. There's actually another calculation for which tick speed is relevant. So I'm going to give you guys a second. Can you guess which calculation or which aspect of battle is also influenced by tick speed? The answer is regen healing. How does the game know how much HP to heal per turn, and why is it not always the same? The answer is because the healing formula depends on ticks, which, as you've already seen, are not regularly spaced and are all over the place depending on what moves are used by the battle participants. So the formula for regen healing for every action taken in battle is the amount of ticks since the last action multiplied by maximum HP divided by 256, all of that plus 100. So this means that the amount of ticks that have gone by since the last action in battle is going to influence the amount of HP that regen heals. So let's look back at that Vidatu battle that I mentioned before. Vidatu has auto regen, which is one of the reasons why I want to use it in this demo as well. Okay, so for Vidatu, let's try to calculate how much auto regen there is going to be happening in the battle. So what I'm going to do is take a small portion of the example battle that I showed you, and using the flow and the numbers that I picked up in that one, we're going to have a look at how much HP Vidatu is going to gain from auto regen between those turns. Now I think the first thing to show you guys, just as proof of how this works, is to have 3 characters that have first strike on their weapons. If that happens, that means that there's going to be 3 characters acting on tick 0. And remember, when there's 0 ticks between character moves, that entire formula gives you 0 plus 100. That should mean that for the first 3 turns when you have first strike, the enemy should only regain 100 every time when they have auto regen. And hopefully that's what you're seeing on screen right now. So based on how I planned it, on tick number 20 it was Riku's turn, and then on tick 24 it was Titus's turn. So let's go for the gap between Riku and Titus's turn. So once it's Titus's turn in battle, you would have seen an auto regen number flash up on top of Vidatu. What is that number going to be? Let's have a look. So since Vidatu has 95,000 HP, we divide that by 256, then if we multiply that by 4 because 4 ticks have passed, and then when we add 100, which gives us 1,584 for the auto regen healing number for Titus's turn, 4 ticks after Riku's. Then Vidatu's next turn is on tick number 25, so it's only 1 tick after Titus's. This means that we just do 95,000, divide that by 256. Since it's only 1 tick, we don't have to do anything. We add 100, which gives us 471. So the next step up from 100 is going to be 471. You're never going to see a number between 100 and 471 because there's no smaller increment of time than 1 tick in the battle. So that's something that, again, you can be pretty clear about. What is the minimum and potential maximum amount of HP that an enemy can regain from regen? And then 4 ticks after Vidatu, it's Waka's turn once again, and then in that situation it's going to be the same number that I showed previously, 1,584. One thing I will show is what about when there's a bigger gap in ticks. So after Waka's first turn, there's a 12 tick gap before Riku's second turn. So let's have a look at what happens when there's 12 ticks of time in the battle for auto regen. So once again, 95,000 divided by 256. If we multiply that by 12, then if we add 100, we get 4,553. So realistically, between turns, Vidatu can regain anything from 100 HP up to around the 10,000 range just in 1 turn, depending on the amount of delay between the last actions in the battle. So that's generally the gist of how auto regen works in the game. It is based on the tick counter, and that's why you're going to see some interesting things and wild fluctuations in the battle. Let's say an enemy that has auto regen hits you with a move that inflicts heavy delay and your agility isn't very high, then on the turn after it, you're going to see an obscene amount of healing from auto regen. So that's definitely going to be really interesting to see, and hopefully the numbers that you're seeing on screen match up with some of the numbers I've been talking about and some of the numbers in the annotation. But I'm definitely sure that the formula holds up and you can use it to calculate the amount of HP gain from auto regen for every action in the battle. So this has been an absolutely mammoth video. I feel like I've done like some weird uni lecture on the CTB of Final Fantasy X. I'm hoping that I've presented it in a relatively clear way. Of course there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of tables to refer to, but I promise if you just go through some examples and maybe you're able to test certain parameters, so like fire up a save and use the parameters that already exist within a save that you have, and then practice sort of mapping out how things are going to proceed in the battle. And it's going to be pretty satisfying when you're able to basically map out the moves in a battle. Pick an enemy that only has rank 3 actions, for example, so that you can make life easy for yourself and make it very predictable, and then you can see how those turns are going to play out and play God and just basically gain like omniscience in the battle and see how everything's going to happen. You can even take it further and use like damage calculation formulas, all of the other like strength stats and weapon stats and percentages and all that kind of stuff to try to figure out how much damage you can do. You can pretty much map out everything that's going to happen in the battle before it's happened if you know the mechanics and the calculations, and you give yourself like an RNG range for what can occur in the battle. It's really quite fascinating. So I hope you guys have had a good time. Thank you all so much if you enjoyed this video. This one took a lot of work, like a lot more than normal. I would definitely appreciate like dropping a like, maybe throwing something in the tip jar with super thanks, joining me on Patreon, becoming a channel member. All of that stuff is so useful to the channel, and it helps give me the time and freedom to dedicate myself to making weird and wonderful videos like this, because YouTube's been around for a long time and there's been a lot of Final Fantasy X videos made, but no one has dived into the CTB in this kind of depth on YouTube before. And it's thanks to the support of everyone on the channel that I'm able to do things like this, so thank you all so much, and I hope to share with you more cool things with Final Fantasy X in the future. So that's all guys, I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something and had a good time as well. So I'll see you soon, thank you for watching, take care.